I decided the best way to start a presentation on the VanDamme Academy literature curriculum would be to teach you literature. So you're now here for class. Who's going to ask me if there's a test later? Who's going to ask me how much of your grade this is going to be worth? Because that's always the start of every conversation, which I suppress very, very quickly. All right, so I'm going to start by doing something kind of blasphemous, which is read this with absolutely no intonation at all, and just read the words to you. And there's a purpose in that, and I'll tell you after I do it. So the poem I'm going to teach you is called The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. And here it is. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre gray, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. The land's sharp features seemed to me the century's corpse outleant. Its crypt, the cloudy canopy, the wind its death lament. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken, hard, and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I have to force myself to not stop too much. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead in a full-hearted even song of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small with blast-beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing bloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around, that I could think there trembled through his happy good-night air some blessed hope whereof he knew and I was unaware. All right, so.
I'm very moved.
I'm glad, good. So probably I'm going to guess that most of you got very little out of that poem. The language is complicated, the syntax is complex, the imagery is abstract. So and for the students, I taught this poem to 8th graders this year. When they encounter this the first time, a lot of the words are absolutely, completely unfamiliar to them. They've never heard of a coppice, maybe. I don't know if you guys know. Is that part of your vocabulary? But even things like desolate or crypt, these are unfamiliar words to them. So they have the feeling upon first being exposed to it that it's completely out of their reach, impenetrable, unintelligible to them. And then we go through a process. And I'm going to go through that process with you, but I'm going to foreshorten it because of time limitations. But let me now...
Do you want me to help you pass them out?
As meaningless as possible, so I don't even want you to have a copy.
Do you want me to help?
Oh, that'd be great. So now let's go through it one stanza at a time. And usually what I do with the students is we start simply by looking at the definitions of words. So I ask them which words they're unfamiliar with. We look up the definition and they write a short definition in the left margin of the stanza. Then after we've looked up all the definitions and are sure we know the meanings of the words, and specifically the meanings of the words in the context of this poem, because often there are words that admit of multiple meanings, then we try to decipher the basic meaning of that stanza. And we usually translate it into plain prose and write that in the right-hand margin of the paper. So let's look at the first one. I leant upon a coppice gate. So this is a gate looking out over a small wooded area. That's what a coppice is. When frost was spectre gray, and winter's dregs, so the last moments of winter, made desolate the weakening eye of day. So it's the end of winter, it's the end of the day, it's evening. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres. So just stems of vines outlining the sky that look like strings of broken lyres, so you can imagine them jagged and leafless, because that's how they would look like a string. And all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. So all the people that would normally have populated this area have gone inside and are by their fires. So it's desolate, it's empty of any human presence, and it's desolate in terms of the kind of dreary, wintry, lifeless scene. Okay, and then the second stanza, the land's sharp features seem to me the century's corpse outleant. So we're imagining this person looking out over a landscape. It's a landscape in winter, and I always make the point to the kids that there's any of a number of ways you could describe a wintry landscape. And this one is particularly dismal and dark and morose and tragic, and everything is described in the language of death. So the frost was specter gray. It had the grayness of a ghost. Winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. I asked them, when does the eye weaken? And they said, when you're dying. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh. Haunted in that case means occupied that space at one time, but the word haunted, again, is that suggestion of death and dreariness. So the land's sharp features seem to me the century's corpse outleant. So looking out across this landscape, he sees not just the closing of the day or even the closing of the winter, but the closing of a century. And he's looking back over a century that seems to have proceeded to death, that it's this time that's completely desolate. And so when he sees the physical landscape of the earth, he imagines it a corpse, the body of a time that's just dead. It's crypt, the cloudy canopy. So he looks, I was just saying that I came out this morning and looked at the clouds in the sky and thought, oh, this is perfect. So beautiful, I'm so happy. This person is looking out at the clouds and imagining it the ceiling of a tomb. It's just this oppressive thing closing in the corpse of the earth.
So Lisa, how
Yes.
would you interpret outlean?
I think it just means kind of the projections of the landscape are what suggest the body of a corpse to him. Please ask any questions like that, interrupt at any time. The wind, it's death lament. Again, wind could be a cooling breeze. It could be, the briskness of winter, or it can be the sound of it can be mourning somebody's death. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken, hard, and dry. So there's no life. There's no human life. There's no life of foliage growth. And every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. So by the time we've gotten to this point with them, they see that this is somebody reflecting on a terrible time, a dismal time, seeing feeling a hopelessness about the future. So seeing nothing but death and desolation around him. And I wanted to make it the point to them that this is not, I don't want them to think of this as just a really depressed individual person who's mourning his own death because of that line, the century's corpse outleant. This is much broader in scope than just a single person's sort of emotional devastation. And I asked them, when in history might somebody look out upon the landscape and feel this way? Someone immediately said, after the Black Death. And I said, that's the sort of scale of catastrophe that would make somebody look out upon the earth and feel that this hopelessness and desperation. Somebody else said after World War I. Somebody else said after World War II, which was my first thought too. by the way, the fact that they're able to make those connections is a really important tribute to the other aspects of their education. It both enhances their ability to understand literature, and now they have a emotional, poetic means of describing that thing they learned about in history. So it goes both ways. So that's where we are in the poem. Then the next stanza. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead, in a full-hearted even-song of joy illimited. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, with blast-beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So as he's contemplating this miserable time and feeling hopeless, he looks up and sees in these lifeless twigs a little bird that just sings its heart out with unconstrainedly, with illimited joy. And the students had the same experience that you did reading this the first time, of it being unintelligible or impenetrable to them. And when we got to that stanza and we had looked up the words and I had explained that stanza to them, I looked up and one of my students was crying.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the last stanza. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around. So he's saying this bird had so little cause for joy in the world as I saw it at that time, that I could think there trembled through his happy goodnight air some blessed hope, whereof he knew and I was unaware. So the joy of this little bird's song gave him the feeling that maybe there is hope out there, and somehow this little bird is able to see it and I'm not in this moment. Beautiful, isn't it?
So much better now.
What's that?
It's so much better now.
You get it now, yeah. So I won't take the time to do it, but I always do in class. If I go through and read this to you again, and especially for the students after we've painstakingly looked up all the words and we've translated the stanzas into plain prose, and we've made connections to things with them, if I go back and read it to them afterwards, it's like, wow, I'm smart. They have that feeling of power, and I don't know how many of you read poetry, but this was something I had to discover for myself too, because if you know, I pick up a book of poetry and this is in it, the first time through I'm like, okay, I don't know what that's saying, and I have to go and do this work, but then after I do, if I know, you know, I just know certain authors that it's worth the labor of putting in the work and you're going to get a payoff like this, and Thomas Hardy is one of them. She actually introduced me to Thomas Hardy. So I know it's worth it, and then I get to experience Now, one of the things we do is always make connections from one work of literature to the next. And often, although I can't remember if in this case I had made a specific, actually I did. Okay, so often we'll connect it to the poetry to other works of literature. And we had just finished reading A Doll's House by Ibsen. That was the first work we did this year. And I'm going to blow the plot of A Doll's House, so sorry, spoiler alert. So A Doll's House, for those who haven't read it, is the story of a woman who, as the play opens, is in this seemingly very happy marriage, conventionally happy marriage. Her husband is the kind of caretaker, knight in shining armor. He calls her his little skylark. This is 18th century Norway, so the kids have to learn to understand the context of the play. She's carefree. She just likes to play with her children and wrap Christmas presents, and everything seems wonderful. And then something happens. She had to take out a loan, we learn, to help her husband to go to a better climate for a time because he was ill. But she kept it a secret from him because knowing that he was so ill would have made it stressful for him and compounded his illness. So she kept this a secret, but she also, it turns out, forged a signature to get the loan. So she was basically involved in criminal activity and didn't even realize, didn't have the maturity or sophistication even to understand that. So she ends up being blackmailed, and she's going to have to tell her husband, and she's worried about poisoning her household and poisoning her children, and she even thinks about running away or killing herself. And she thinks, when my husband finds out, he's going to be so indebted to me, and he's going to be my knight in shining armor and try to protect me, and I have to save him from that. And then her husband finds out, and he says, from now on we are married only in name, you're a despicable person, completely turns on her. And it's this startling, I mean, the kids, when we read this part, are like, what? This is completely not what anyone had expected, although we had seen a little, indications of his character. And she learns from that experience that she has never had a mind or ideas or understanding of her own. And what startles her into this realization is she realized she's been living in a doll's house. She's just been playing house, and she's been a doll, and her husband has told her what to think, and her father told her what to think before that. And she realizes, and so one of the lines toward the end of the play is, I have to go find out who's right, the world or I. And she just realizes she has, so she ends up leaving her home, leaving her children, going off on her own. You can imagine how profoundly scandalous this was at the time. The last scene in the play is just the door closing, and it was known as the slam door heard round the world. And in fact, I learned that there were, at the time, people would send party invitations and ask people in the invitations that they not discuss Mr. Ibsen's play. That's how scandalous this thing was. So anyway, my connection of this poem to that was really the desolation of her life at that point. That looking back over everything she had thought and had been, and seeing that it wasn't what she thought, and facing this time of desolation, and then the question of, is there a moment of hope for her? So that was the connection of this one. But when I'm going to tell you two other stories about teaching this poem in particular. I asked them, can you think of another moment in literature where there's a character like that little bird? Is there a moment where, things seem despairing, and there's somebody who inspires you with a little hope? So if you've read To Kill a Mockingbird, there's a scene in To Kill a Mockingbird where they're in front of a courthouse, and Atticus's life is being threatened, and there's a mob basically ready to lynch the person that's in jail and to kill Atticus to get to him if they need to. And little Scout, his daughter, gets up and stands next to him, looks out among the crowd and says, "Oh, hey, Mr. Cunningham, how's your son? How's Walter?" And this has the effect of completely dismantling this mob. And I could go on and on about why it has that effect, but it's just this little innocence that sheds light on what they're doing, and they're not able to go ahead with it anymore. Someone in the class made that connection. She said that little bird is like Scout in that moment, and I thought that was brilliant and perfect. But they're even more brilliant. I learned things from the students when we go over these things. So someone in class said, "Is it a baby bird?" And I said, "Well, no, because there's that word aged in here, an aged thrush," which I hadn't really thought about. And I said, why do you think it says aged? And someone said, well, it makes the rhyme scheme work. And I was like, yeah, but that's not that's not a good reason. So then one of the students said, well, it wouldn't mean as much as a message of hope if it was naive, if it was just a child's perspective of hope. So for it to be an aged thrush makes it a more grave, not grave, a more serious or weighty, sort of message.
That's so
Really.
insightful.
Isn't that great?
That's so funny.
That's the moments I live for.
It's not even the first time I've heard that story, and this time I'm like,
Yeah. So Mrs. Steele and I are literary kindred spirits, and that was clear from the moment I met her. And she has all the same excitement that I do. We've introduced each other to poetry. We call each other feverishly over new discoveries. We tell each other these stories, and that's just, it's an amazing situation for me, but also for your children, because she's teaching now 2nd through 6th grade, and I teach 7th and 8th grade literature. So they're getting this approach to literature as continuity in ever increasingly abstract works of literature all the way around, and she's going to tell you some stories from her classes too. One thing I wanted to just describe briefly, I have my notes in case I forget anything, is my own experience with literature, and I don't know if it was similar to yours, but I expect it was the same for a lot of you. I never read a poem and cried. I never was taught it in a way that made me feel moral inspiration from it. At best, we would use it as a vocabulary exercise, so we would look up the words, but that would be an end in itself sort of exercise, and then we'd have maybe a quiz on the vocabulary words. Literature so often felt like it was meant to make us more sophisticated, to increase our vocabulary so we do well on the SATs, to make us able to say when we go to a cocktail party that someone was just telling me she went to a Great Gatsby party at the Discovery Science Center, and someone said to her, "Oh, I've never seen that movie." But anyway, just so that you know when you go to the Discovery Science Center what the Great Gatsby is. So our goal here is to, I'm going to use poetic language. It's to use literature to expand their souls, to make them aware of and have the words for a vast array of life situations. Reading a poem like this, like I said, when they encounter a situation like this in history, they will have had it conceptualized and made visual, and it helps them to be able to feel something and understand something more deeply. That's just one example. We're having conversations like this daily on on very wide-ranging topics. So I looked up some teacher's guides for the Darkling Thrush, and they had vocabulary exercises. They have what I like to call the diving board principle in literature, that you use literature as a springboard for anything you want to talk about. So for example, you read the Darkling Thrush and you do a project on thrushes. Or you read the Darkling Thrush and as when you write your own 3-stanza poem about winter. Okay, I mean that could be a useful exercise, but that's not getting them to a meaningful, soulful understanding of the message of this poem. And that's our goal with everything that we teach. We try to find things that contain that meaning and are worth talking about, and our goal is to help them to extract that meaning from it and understand it. She cringed when I told her this. Another teacher's guide made an analogy between the bird and the coming of Santa Claus.
Oh, what?
But you can imagine.
No.
No. But often, very, very often, my objection to proposed teacher's guides for literature is it completely trivializes the literature, because the person writing that curriculum doesn't have the depth of understanding, doesn't understand the purpose, and therefore, but just has, maybe this figured its way on a list of poems that are worth teaching. But you have to teach it effectively, connect with and understand what the moral meaning of it is.
Can I?
Yes, please.
So there is a story that it's my favorite children's story. It's called The Goldfish, and it is about a little goldfish who falls in love with the moon and thinks it's so unfair that he can't marry the moon, possess the world, and he just has these really big dreams. And there's this porpoise who laughs at him and thinks he's an idiot, and King Neptune eventually helps the goldfish to be captured by a fisherman who puts... It's gonna make me cry. He puts him in a fishbowl with this silver fish who he calls his wife and his moonfish and his darling. And as he looks around inside of this fishbowl, inside the fisherman's house, he sees trinkets from the fisherman's travels. So he sees the entire world from inside the fishbowl. And so all of his dreams of his life are completely fulfilled, but in a completely unexpected way, which I relate to on a really personal level, because when I was in college, I was like, I'm going to be an actor, and it's going to be awesome. And then I decided to be a teacher. And I feel as though the main aspects of my dreams have still been 100% fulfilled, because I get to perform in front of a live audience every day. The script is a little different, and I like it better. And in addition, I get to be surrounded by children that I love every day. And so I share this with them, and I have these wonderful lessons with these children. I've taught this to, I think, every literature class that I've had. And I tell them this story afterward. And at one point, I looked up online like how other teachers were teaching this story, and I wanted to die. I was so upset because they turn it into a lesson about the dangers of being naive and how that can make you trapped, and how the porpoise who laughs at the goldfish is actually the realistic person in that story. And oh God, I shut my computer in disgust, and I'm never looking up anything like that again. It made me cringe, it made me want to cry, and then I went and I taught the story again the next day because I was like, nope. I need to cancel that out of the world.
That's great.
Do you think these guys is that the standard? I mean,
Well,
in
let
Common
me
Core or
ask
whatever,
you,
is that what they're
is
using?
that for in your literature classes, is that what it was like?
I just
in
remember
school?
doom and gloom. from
Doom and
literature.
gloom. Yeah.
Just kind of,
I can also say, I mean, Kira came out of this curriculum.
Yes.
And then I don't think she's learned one bit
Mm.
ever since in any literature class.
Mm.
You know, she went through high school.
Mm-hmm.
And she did one degree.
She did well. Yeah.
She
Yeah.
did well, she got whatever in AP, but
Yeah.
she didn't actually get any sort of deep.
Well, I should point out, I think all of you know this as a kind of fact of the structure of the school, but we have a class called literature. I remember Mrs. Beach saying that Bianca would talk to her friends in the neighborhood and say, well, in my literature class, and they'd be like, you're a what?
Don't you mean
What
English
does
class?
literature mean? No, but that's not even a word that they would use. And part of the reason is that literature is distinct from English in terms of the development of language skills. It does, of course, enhance that development, but that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is an art. So even when they get to high school, there's an English class, and there's a heck of a lot crammed in
But they do have literature.
in English class.
Well, it's two different types of.
Okay. So they did separate it out.
Yeah, they do
Okay.
separate it, but.
But she's still
But
been.
still,
Yeah.
their interpretation, it's not, they do the springboard type of.
The springboard
thing.
thing.
Make connections. that-
Where I remember
So what
making dioramas when we read Tennessee Williams, you know.
Oh,
High school, that's high school, dioramas. So I don't know, anyone else have any comment on your English experience? I remember one of my graduates coming back from high school, and I asked her about her English class, because I always do, and she said, well, we read something, and then we come in and we take a 25-question multiple choice test about it. I was like, oh, kill me now.
yeah.
And then she talked a little longer, and I said, so what's your favorite class? And she goes, English. And I said, why? And she said, the teacher knows my name.
oh my gosh.
That was really
That's a
devastating.
low bar.
That's a low bar. But yeah, this is, in my experience, and you too, right?
I
Yeah.
have some horrible stories.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So, in the risk of being a little poetic again, I was recently listening to a speaker talk about, I think the topic was what's killing Western civilization or something like that. But at one point, the issue came up of a quest for meaning, and that we seem to be in a time in which we have this incredible and profound material abundance, and that's amazing. And it allows us to live long, healthy, thriving lives, and it gives us access to things that we could never have had access to before. So this material abundance is such a wonderful benefit to humanity, but we also need a meaning and a moral purpose in our lives. And that's something that, getting a little philosophical, the Enlightenment doesn't seem quite to have inspired our new world with. So it's made possible the conditions for us to all seek out really meaningful lives, but then we have to learn how to do that. And I sincerely, passionately believe that literature is one of the main ways that we can help people do that. And I do think that our students, if they learn literature this way from 2nd through 8th grade, have an amazing resource, just this profoundly rich experience of being exposed to all sorts of choices in life, and deep and important and penetrating sorts of choices. So just quickly, I told you about A Doll's House. I just finished watching with the 8th graders. We have movie appreciation too, and we just finished watching a movie called This Land Is Mine, which was made in the 1940s. It's very primitive in terms of its production values. They have to be, prepared to watch this very primitive black and white, simple movie. And there was a moment, I sometimes take a picture where something happened, and I saw the whole class go like this, and then 2 of them started sobbing again. And it's nothing's graphic, of course, nothing's fast moving, it's an intellectual sort of response, but they really responded to it. And what that movie is about the Nazi occupation of France, but a very specific, it's not like the Schindler's List sort of focus of a Nazi regime. There's very little violence or death in it. The focus of it is, what do you do under an occupation? Do you try to make life as supportable for you as possible? Or do you resist? And the consequences of resistance are severe, but the consequences of not resisting are worse and more long-reaching. So that's the theme. So they've already been exposed to A Doll's House, to The Darkling Thrush, to This Land Is Mine. In 7th grade, we started with 12 Angry Men, which is a courtroom drama. We read it, read the script of it, a courtroom drama about a murder trial, and one man, 11 of the 12 immediately vote guilty, and one of them says, I'm just not so sure, and I think we owe it to a child who's going to have his life taken away from him to talk about it before we make this decision. And through it, it exposes all sorts of, we call it patterns of irrational thinking, like emotionalism or hasty generalizations or a confirmation bias, only looking for things that support your preformed conclusion. And it's just amazing. And then we did the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. I don't know if you know that one, but you will soon, because we'll do it at the recital. So, and you want to give some examples of, so that's just an example of the exposure that they've had, the variety of themes they've been exposed to so far this year, and project that out over the course of many, many years, and you can imagine the richness of experience that they take away with them.
I could talk a little bit about what we've been doing in my classes, and there's 5 of them, so I'll try to keep it short for each one. So I'll start with 2nd grade. We started the year off by reading Sarah Plain and Tall by Patricia McLaughlin, she's one of my favorite children's authors. She is so lovely, and her style of writing is so particularly wonderful for children because she doesn't do the thing that a lot of children's authors tend to do, which is really just condescend and over-explain. She keeps things very poetically simple, and I love that for children. And it's about these two children who their mother passes away in childbirth while she's giving birth to the son, and it takes place years and years later when the father actually puts an ad in the newspaper to see if he can get them a stepmother to come live with them. And so they have this opportunity to build this new relationship with a woman who very much improves their lives, makes it so beautiful. She brings flowers into the home that she hangs in the doorway. She cooks soup for them. She's really funny too. She cuts their hair and she throws the hair out into the wind so that in the summertime the birds can make nests out of the hair. It's so sweet. So I love that book. I actually didn't mean to talk about it as long as I can't help myself. It's so lovely. Patricia McLaughlin. She's wonderful. She has so many books, and I love all of them. And then we did a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay. We did Afternoon on a Hill, which is just a really short little poem about spending a day in nature, and then as the stars start to come out, you see the light of your house down at the bottom of the hill, and you walk towards it, and it's so lovely. And then, let's see, then we just finished Babe, which I can talk about for years, and I won't. Right now, it's my favorite book ever. It's so good.
Do you want to tell your Babe story?
I do. I love my Babe story. Okay, so my Babe story is my favorite story. So with the second graders, they're still very young. Obviously, they're in second grade, and so a lot of our discussions revolve mostly around, like, what happened in the chapter that you read? Like, do you remember it? And let's try to construct an entire narrative based on what you read last night and the night before. Mm-hmm. And so then we just kind of piece it together, and then as the discussion goes on, I'll point out things that I think are important for them to notice. And one of the things that I was very adamant about pointing out is the contrast between two of the characters, the farmer, Mr. Hoggett, and his wife, Mrs. Hoggett. They are extremely different in the way that he is very, very, very skinny and she is very, very, very fat. And she never, ever, ever stops talking. She speaks in these long paragraphs, and we did an exercise in class where we would read one of her long paragraphs out loud, and then we would say, what did she say? What was she asking in one sentence? Yeah. And we're always able to pare it down to one sentence. And Farmer Hoggett, on the other hand, will only respond with one or two words. It's very difficult to make him speak, and he only does it when he really, really wants to. And so just bare minimum from him all the time. And at the end of the book, Babe, the sheep pig, wins this big sheepdog competition, and Farmer Hoggett looks at him, pats him on the head, and there's all this cheering going on around them, and very quietly he murmurs, "That'll do, that'll do." And then we close the book, and this girl in my class is like, and I said, "Yes," and she goes, "He said it twice." And I go, I'm so happy that... It's like, exactly, that's the point. Like, I had this whole thing I was going to say. I was going to talk for like 20 minutes about how important that was, and she just said, "He said it twice." And I was like, thank you, Farmer Hoggett, for saying what I was going to say in a full paragraph in just a sentence. And oh gosh, and there are many reasons why that book is so wonderful. We also had a long conversation about what it means to when I say, like, you get more flies with honey than with vinegar. And there's a lot of really good conversations that come out of that book. Anyway, in third grade, we just finished reading Island of the Blue Dolphins, which is one of my personal favorites from when I was very young. We actually read it in fourth grade when I was in elementary school. And the thing that I really like about Island of the Blue Dolphins and books like that is that the main character is by herself. she is completely alone in nature and just has to do her best to survive. And the reason that I like that so much is because I actually think it's really like psychologically valuable for the kids. When they read that, they see themselves as the main character and they think, what would I do in that situation? Oh, that was really smart. And they look to this person as a hero for being able to fend for themselves when they are completely alone and they don't have help from their parents or from any friends or anything like that. And additionally, what happens in Island of the Blue Dolphins is there's a lot of animal companionship with which the kids really respond to. They love that. And there is a wonderful story about Piranha, the main character, and her dog, and kind of the bond that they share. So there's a lot of discussion that comes out of that book as well, as far as being able to take care of yourself and how hard that is. Also, how smart you have to be to do it, and kind of like pointing out the clever things that she does, the value of not giving up when things are very hard, and also the value of animal friendships, which I think are really nice. In 4th grade, we are just about to finish The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And over the summer, I actually did like a religious pilgrimage to all of the locations from the Little House on the Prairie series. It was so wonderful. Like my heart was just pounding the entire time and I like cried. And so as we've been reading the book, I've been getting to show them photos from that trip. Like this is where they lived and these are the cottonwood trees that Pa planted. And most importantly, the thing that we get out of The Long Winter are the characters. The Ingalls family is an unbeatable group of people. They are incredibly impressive and heroic, and whenever they experience hardship, you know that the next chapter is going to be called something like It Can't Beat Us or something like that. They never give up, and the thing that they say all the time is where there's a will, there's a way. And so we have this thing going in 4th grade where whenever something happens in the book that goes along with where there's a will, there's a way, someone will be like, I found 3 or I found 6 in this chapter. And they kind of try to beat each other, like how many things they can find, how many where there's a will they can find. And in 5th grade, I love the Ingalls family so much. And in 5th grade, we started the year off with Holes, and then we did the poem The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats, which I actually really, really love that poem. The last stanza where he's talking about where he spent a lot of time in his childhood, and he's walking through the streets of I think it was London, and it's, like very gray and he feels it's oppressive, but he hears the sound of a fountain and it reminds him of this island, the sound of the lake water lapping against the side of an island where he grew up. And my favorite line is, I hear it in the deep heart's core. Like he carries that with him in his heart his entire life. And so I really like talking to the kids about like savoring the things that you value now and like going back to that as you go on, because it's a really valuable, like comforting thing to carry in your deep heart's core.
Can I share a quick story about that poem
Yeah.
that I don't think I've ever told you, because I didn't know you were teaching it. So I think some of you know that a lot of my educational inspiration came from my grandparents, my mother's parents. They were educated on the East Coast in a different era, in a different sort of place. And they just seemed so knowledgeable and so wise by comparison to my peers, and even as we graduated from college, that it just seemed like I need to somehow give myself what they were given. My grandmother, I hadn't thought of this in a long time, but I remember her telling me a story that when she was young, she and her friends decided to learn and memorize a bunch of poetry. And one of the poems they wanted to memorize was that one. And the first line I remember only because of this story was, I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree. And so they were practicing, they were very proud of themselves and constantly practicing this. And so they sit down at a table with their friends and they say, I will arise and go now. And one of their friends stands up and says, we will arise and go now. Because they were so tired.
That is so cute. I say that whenever I I'm like leaving the house to
I
Mr.
will
Steele.
arise
I
and
go,
go now."
I will arise and go now.
Which, by the way, is a very important point because these poems do stock their minds with eloquent phrases that come out in their speech, in their writing. I remember years ago a student writing a paper for me, and at one point he described someone's eyes as being hollows of madness and rage.
Wow.
Like, we got a future novelist here. And I'm like, "Hollows of-" And then I remembered a poem that we had read called The Highwayman that has a line that says, his eyes were hollows of madness, his hair was like moldy hay. Now he added the and rage
Right.
part of it to it, and the adding that was because he was not conscious at all that he had gotten it from that poem. It just became a part of his mode of expression. So that's one of the great values of poetry and literature in general, is it makes you not just more eloquent, because that's not, it makes you more insightful, more able to see, more able to value, more able to appreciate, because it gives you this penetrating vision into things that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that about poetry. I love poetry.
So,
I'll just say what I'm doing in 6th grade really
Yes.
quickly. But I had a View from Saturday story.
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell it quickly because I know I've been talking for a really long time. I love The View from Saturday because I love E.L. Konigsberg. She also wrote The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. And The View from Saturday is about a group of kids who participate in an academic bowl with their teacher, Mrs. Olinsky. And when you get into a little bit of background of Mrs. Olinsky's story, you learn that she actually retired, but then came back to teaching. And the reason that she retired is because students stopped asking "now what" and started asking "so what." And that is like a very poignant line. And so we really unpacked that, and we spent the entire class period talking about it yesterday. I made a table on the board, and I put "now what" on one side, "so what" on the other, and we just started putting things that a "now what" student would say and things that a "so what" student would say on either side. And then I started telling them, like, okay, can you think of people from literature, from your life, who are "now what" people? And they started saying, Anne from Anne of Green Gables. I was like, totally, yeah, that's great. Can you think of a "so what" person? Trout Walker from Holes, 100%. Yeah, that's wonderful, because he's described as being proud of his own stupidity. I'm like, that's perfect. And the thing that really surprised me and really was touching for me is that they started naming each other as "now what" students. They said, I think so-and-so is a "now what" student, and then that person would kind of blush. And then they started naming their parents, and they started naming their aunts and uncles. And I thought that that was a really sweet connection from literature to their lives that they experience right now. And I thought that that was really beautiful and wonderful. I'm going to remember that forever. And then, so 6th grade, we did Tuck Everlasting. We did a poem by my favorite poet, Emily Bronte. I love her. It's called To Imagination. It's wonderful. And right now we're reading Ender's Game. And I'm excited to connect that to Beowulf when we read it next. It's going to be fun. Okay, I talked for a really long time. I'm done.
well, that's our overview of the literature curriculum, and we are available for questions. Let me just see how, yeah, we still have time.
Can I ask a selfish question?
Yeah.
You had interesting. So I'm reading Tuck Everlasting.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever read it because from what I've gotten from Alana. Do you have any interesting stories about discussions about that book? Because it's full of very.
It's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Let's see.
You can admit that it's not your favorite.
It actually is not my favorite book. I like it more now that I've taught it. At first, when I read it over the summer, I was like, I can see that it is valuable, so I will teach it, but it's not my favorite novel. But then over the course of teaching, I was like, this is actually really great. And I have a story. It's not from the class, it's from me, but I shared it with the class, and it made them laugh and understand what I was talking about. So there's a part in the book where we talk about Winnie, the main character, and how she is absolutely terrified of the outside world. She's not allowed to go outside the gates that enclose her cabin. And her parents make sure that she knows, like, you can't go outside without protection. All of these terrible things will happen to you. There's no way that you can manage on your own. And she's never given any example. She has no idea what that means. But in the book it says her imagination filled in the details for her. And I said, this is something that all of us do. You've done it. I do it every day. And I told them this story. I am a backseat driver. I'm not fun to be in the car with if I'm not driving. It's terrible. It's really, I know that I'm bad. So when Mr. Steele is driving and a car that's like 4 car lengths ahead of us puts on their brakes, I go, and he's like, it's fine, we're okay. And I'm like, okay. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not that much. And I told the kids, I said, this is what I do. Can you tell me what happens in my head and why I do that? And one of the kids raised their hand and they said, well, in your imagination, you're dying in a fiery car crash. And I go, yeah, but do I really have a reason to think that that's going to happen? They're like, no. And I go, no, my imagination fills in the details. And so I asked them for examples of maybe times that they'd done that to themselves and they didn't want to share, which I get. It's a little embarrassing. So that would be my favorite Tuck Everlasting story.
Other questions? Yes.
So you've talked a little bit about how you use literature to help your students kind of stoke the flames of seeking the deeper meaning in things.
Yeah.
How have you seen parents supplement that really well in the household, not through literature, in a way that's symbiotic with what you're doing?
That's a very good question. I think the best way is simply to cultivate that in yourself. So being a reader, an inquisitive person, and engaging the sorts of conversations that would come up in literature in your home, I think is definitely one of the things that will help children develop into those sorts of soulful and thoughtful and reflective kind of people.
Someone who asks now what instead of so what.
Yeah. At the risk of total lack of humility, I'm extraordinarily proud of my 2 VanDamme Academy graduates, my daughters Lana and Greta, who are now at a school called Thomas Aquinas College, which is a great books program. It's a tiny school. It's only about 400 people. They read and read and read and read. They read all original sources. They have discussions about them that the professor guides and inspires, but does not lecture. It's the students. The idea is that the texts are the teachers, and the students are working very hard to decipher the text. Just to give you an example of how much reading they do, in the first year, they have 6 classes, one of which is theology class. And I was talking to my daughter, who just finished, who's in her sophomore year, and I said, was it the Old Testament or the New Testament that you read for a theology class? And she said, no, Mom, the Bible. We read the whole thing, the entire thing. That was one class. They read Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. They read Plato. They read Aristotle. They read The Insects of Henry Cobb. They read, it's just extraordinary how much reading they do. But anyway, the point I was going to make is one of the reasons they sought out that school is that it has an intellectual climate like no other I've seen in a long time. The kids are deeply motivated to learn. And just this last week, occasionally they will have movie screenings in the community hall that they have on campus. And just this weekend, they did 12 Angry Men, coincidentally. One of my daughters hadn't seen it, so shame on me. But anyway, my Greta called me immediately after, just kind of bristling with enthusiasm and talking about the conversation she'd had, and she just said, it's so nice to be in a place where everybody gets value out of a movie like that, and they all want to talk about it. So anyway, they are the sort of people, and have, thank goodness, found an environment that fosters that, who really that's how they approach the world now. And I've actually reflected often. I was in the car for some reason this morning thinking about how different they are as people than I was at their age. So I get to take some credit for helping them to develop into those people. But oh my goodness, that was not me when I was 18 or 17. So I'm really, I'm really, I'm proud of who they've become. Yes.
Well, my son's in 4th grade,
Mhm.
so with the long winter, I was asking him, why do you think that they chose this book for you guys to read? And he couldn't tell me why, so then we started talking about, okay, well, you know, how are they trying to relate the story to your life or the stage that you're at and stuff like that. So I was just gonna ask, do you guys discuss why you choose the books, or do you discuss why you choose the pieces and how you see that fitting into where they're at in their grade level?
So I don't think I've taken the moment to explicitly say, I am teaching you this book because X. However, the things that we discuss throughout specifically the long winter are mostly revolving around the reasons why the characters are wonderful, heroic, admirable characters. And that's why we're reading it, is for the characters. Almanzo Wilder, Pa, Ma, and Laura are all incredibly admirable figures. And as we're going through, we're filling in our mental pictures of what that means. And as we go through, we talk about more examples that prove that Pa is an excellent provider for his family and keeps their spirits up when things get hard, and reasons why Almanzo Wilder is an honorable man, and things like that. So while I haven't said it explicitly, maybe I will.
Well, I'm not sure. Occasionally I'll do that. I'll say, everyone knows that Victor Hugo's 93 is my favorite book, and they all know that their education ends with that because it's my favorite. I mean, it's my favorite for reasons that make it ideal for the end of their education, but it's not completely self-absorbed. But I don't think I very often, it's actually a really abstract and challenging question probably for him to say, why do you think they teach that book? That really makes him have to step way back from it. And sometimes that can be too abstract a level to address the question. So he'll come away with the material that goes into why it was important, but then naming that in terms of those explicit terms might be difficult. I remember learning in college, we had to write an essay about why we like X, why we do some activity or something. That's one of the most extraordinarily difficult topics you can write. It's just hard. It takes so much self-reflection and abstract thinking and to understand why you like something. So that might be.
I brought that up because he was having a hard time. You know, it's the pace of the book is very slow.
Oh yeah.
And the language is heavy. And
my advice then is just to wait, give it time. You have to build your reading muscles. It's not something that's automatic. I like to give the example for myself of my discovery of the visual arts. I've always been a words person. Literature, at least for a long time, not when I was 17 and 18, but has been my go-to art. And we used to have a teacher here, Mr. Travers, who taught the visual arts, painting. And he had a method. My experience going to museums before Mr. Travers was to walk through a museum and say, that's pretty, that's pretty, that's pretty, and after about 2 hours feel so exhausted I just wanted to go home. He taught us a way to choose a few works of art, deeply engage with it, get the meaning out of it, and then I had for the first time the experience of the same sort of emotional stimulation I got out of literature, getting that from the visual arts. So, but I had to learn that process, and I had to practice it a lot, and over time it's becoming more automatic for me. So I would say for now, if a child has a reaction like, I don't get the value of this, and there are going to be certain books that they connect with more than others, some are just not going to speak to them directly, but just patiently wait through that process, and over time they get better and better at it, and it becomes more automatic. Yeah.
Kind of follow on to that, and because I thought that was a great question, because my son Dad's also a 4th grader, and like I grew up loving reading, and he's got a part of that, but you know, for example, working through the book, it's definitely been, there's other books he'll just grab and read, that's not one of them,
Okay.
right? But, and I do have that sense that it is a journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't know how to, like, out of the gate, I used to, like, put the cover over my head when they'd make me go to sleep, and, you know, I was that kid, right? I'm trying to get him to that.
I'm gonna make this really simple for you. He doesn't have to be that kid. And he doesn't have to like the books, and he doesn't even have to like literature.
Right.
Because when he graduates, that will all be in him. And I know that with all my students. Some gravitate much more to reading than others. Even my own son, last summer, he wanted to devour books all summer. He does his reading for school with no difficulty, but right now, he's not interested in reading outside of that, and that's okay. He can play with his Matchbox cars instead. And they'll go through phases, and some books they'll respond to more than others. But the serenity that you can have having your kids at this school is that he is going to be engaged in a daily 45-minute discussion of the book that he has read, whether he loves it or not. And over time, my hope is that will inspire that. And sometimes there's, like, you can be a carrier for a while and not yet infected with the disease. It might be something that comes out in him. I just call literature a disease. Well, I've got it bad. It may come out in him later, but
don't feel like
he needs to be excited about it now. No, I'm not. I'm always okay with that.
The value is still there, even if he's not actively excited about it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
I had a son start 1st grade, and 20 minutes of reading was like torture for him. And it was music to my ears. He's in 6th grade now, but it was music to my ears. We were driving home, and he said, "I can't wait to get home and find out what happens in the chapter." So, you know, it's taken time, but I mean, I wouldn't say he's reading at night under his covers, but I've seen a progression.
Tell your story without naming names.
Yeah, and it was
Without
reluctant
and that was
student
music
story.
to my ears. It was one of the books
Who
that
handed in the book.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's such a good one. So there's a boy, and I won't name names, but he was very reluctant to read Tuck Everlasting in the beginning of the year. I was passing out the books, and he goes, "I have read this 15 times. I've seen the movie. I don't want to read it again." And I was like, "I'm sorry, that's what the class is reading. Here you go, put your name in it." And like, I didn't know what else to say. I'm very sympathetic, but at the same time, I'm like, this is what we're doing. And we read the book. As the time went on, he was getting more and more into discussion, and to the point where I was seeing a lot of like happiness in class and like enthusiasm to participate. And then at the end, I just had them turn in their books the other day, and he handed it to me, and he goes, And he didn't want to give it back. And I go, "Oh, you don't want to give it back?" He goes, "I love this book." So
We'll try to
I
get
love
that.
that. Yeah.
That was a quick turnaround.
It was,
Yeah.
yeah. A few weeks.
Any other
I don't
questions?
have a question, but I have a comment actually on
Yeah.
what you said about history in particular.
Yeah.
Rowan she's picked up this book called The Story of Psychology for some reason.
Okay.
It's quite heavy. But the whole beginning is the beginning from ancient Egypt when they first started thinking about,
The mind.
the mind.
Yeah, okay.
And I was reading it with her, and after a couple of chapters she said, without history, I would have no idea what they were talking about, but I know all these people. And I thought, oh man, because last year was ancient history, so it's just,
What grade is she in?
she's in 7th. But it was just, it really struck me.
Seth was calculating at Starbucks this morning, very loudly calculating when Egypt must have started if it was 5,000 years ago. And I could see the other patrons in the coffee shop.
Who is this child?
That's great.
Yeah,
That's when you have to hand out pamphlets.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you heard the story how Nolan parents decided to, he's in 1st grade,
Yes.
decided to come here? They were at a birthday party.
Okay.
And some of the other kids in the pool were talking about
Yeah.
osmolarity and the water and all this change. And he said, "Where do you go to school?" That's
We're
where our
going
kids
there.
are going.
Oh,
That's where we're going.
great.
It was just a conversation in the neighborhood in the pool.
That's
so
Like you said, your kids were.
They're good ambassadors.
Mm.
I think I know who
You
it
know
was
that
too. I
story.
think I know. I didn't remember that, but I think I know who they met and
Okay.
talked to. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that literature is tweezed apart from writing. It's one of my favorite parts of your program. But how do you weave it together?
Oh.
And when do you weave it together?
Oh, well, it's not completely separate from writing because they write almost every day in literature.
Okay.
Yes, we don't
Okay.
just discuss. And in fact, that is crucially important because they'll often have a sort of loose, tenuous grasp of something. And the process of having to put it into clearly formulated words, make sure they understand it clearly, and cements it into their minds. So even with This Land Is Mine, just yesterday, we were discussing questions, and then they would write answers to them in their own words after our discussion. So whether it's notes and sort of drawing out the essentials and capturing those in notes, right now we're reading Shane in 7th grade, and I have this habit of coming in and writing up on the board. Yesterday, I think it was hat, taproot, silence, and apple pie. And I was like, all right, who can tell me why I wrote, like, what is the significance of you? And it just leads right into a stimulating abstract conversation. They're like, I know what the silence is about. So each of those moments in the book had an important abstract meaning. But then they'll either write notes or they'll write paragraph answers to things, or there's some sort of writing to supplement and enhance their understanding of literature and to learn the practice of writing as connected with literature.
And do the literature teachers
Mhm.
ever coordinate with the writing teachers? So Mr.
I do,
Cobra
yeah.
Mhm.
Last year after we read The Hobbit, I had the students write an essay, and I collaborated with Mr. Cobra on how best to assign that and how best to complement his classes. So I led them through the process of writing an outline, and we did rough drafts, second drafts, final drafts.
Not to make it a springboard situation, but
Yeah.
I would think sometimes
No,
they
no, no.
would
No,
wanna
that's
get-
not a springboard
yeah, working
situation.
together,
No,
yeah.
Right,
that's,
yeah,
that's
no.
a reinforcing
Right.
and solidifying the value sort of
Agreed.
Yeah.
activity.
And then in 5th grade, we write at least 3 times a week, usually more. Whether that's notes, I ask them short questions that requires them to respond in like 1 or 2 sentences, and then occasionally we'll write a paragraph about one of the characters or something like that.
Any other questions? Okay, yes. Sure.
Since we're new to the school.
Yes.
So is a lot of the analysis done verbally, or is there analysis where you're giving them like a short question that they then have to respond to, so you can just sort of test, not really test, but assess, are they getting it? What's their interpretation?
Oh,
Is
sure.
it written?
So basically what we'll do in 6th grade is I'll assign them the chapter, they'll come in the next day, we'll discuss it, I'll ask, I'll make the points that I want to make, like these are the things I want you to notice, and I'll ask them certain discussion questions, and we'll even discuss the answers to some of the questions that I'm going to give them. And then I give them the questions, and they'll write their responses.
I think you might be asking something
Am I
different, though, to
missing the
make
point of
sure
the
that
question?
they are getting a basic comprehension on their own and not just from
Oh.
So in 7th grade with Shane, which they're reading at home, I'll come in and say, explain the Ledyard incident. That's it. Just explain that to me. And my 7th graders, one person hadn't done the reading, so that alerts me to the fact that they haven't done the reading. And everybody else just wrote exquisite descriptions. I don't think I've ever given so many A+ in my life. So that's my means, and I know you do this.
Yeah, I do something similar. I missed the
Yeah.
missed the
It was
question.
both.
Yeah.
My daughter will read something, and and she's not quite sure she's understanding it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just say, well, what does it mean to you?
Mhm.
You know, so we'll just have that discussion, and then, you know, she can either
Yeah.
validate or say, oh, actually, I was thinking about it in a different way, and
Yeah.
she'll realize it on her own.
Yeah, and that's, we want them to have read the chapter, but we don't expect them to come in understanding it, because we're trying to teach them things that are at a level just above what would be naturally, they'd be naturally capable of to stretch them. So one of the things that I wrote on the board for Shane was the apple pie thing. And there's this scene in Shane where these two friends go after this stump on the property and work tirelessly at it all day because it's the only blot on the land and they want it out of there. And they're stubborn about it. The wife comes out, they completely ignore her and she's mad about it. She tells them to hitch up the horses and have the horses help them, and they say, no, this is a matter of pride, we're gonna do it ourselves. And then they finally do it, and it's this heroic moment, and she's watching this heroic moment and lets her apple pie burn. And then she goes back in, they're sitting down to dinner, she goes to that stove, throws the apple pie away, starts from scratch, gets the apples, she's peeling the apples. Her husband comes over to help her and she says, don't touch one of those apples. She ignores them the entire time. And at the end, Shane, one of the characters, says, finally they're like sitting down eating this completed apple pie after this tense interaction. They sit down and he says, that's the best piece of stump I've ever eaten. And the kids came in, about half of the class had no idea. They're like, did she put some of the stump in the pie? They were so confused by that line. And then we had to draw out that, no, she treated the apple pie just like they did the stump, and she was just as stubborn and proud, and I know, isn't it great? This is what we do, so anyway, it's fun when they don't understand that, and you get to open their eyes to it, and over time, they get better and better at doing it on their own.
I love when kids come in and they're like, I don't know what happened in that chapter.
Yeah,
like they
yeah.
read it and they're like, I can tell you the events, but I don't know why they
I don't
happened.
know what the meaning
I
is.
love that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the
But
best thing
teach us
ever.
so
I love
much
unpacking
more.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Just feelings and emotions and
Oh, yeah.
appreciation of.
Right. Our job is to help.
Yeah.
They read the lines. Our job is to help them to read between the lines.
Whoa,
That's a good one.
Thank you.
That's a slogan.
Yeah.
But until they go through that type of literature,
It's not
It's
obvious.
not,
It's not automatic. It's
that they
it's
don't get,
definitely a
I mean,
learned
it's more of a
skill.
grounding into what's real instead of this fast-moving world that
Yes.
we're in right
Oh,
now.
yeah.
Well, and that's okay
Yeah,
too,
I
but
say
you
our
have to
motto
be able
is
to-
VanDamme Academy. We're slow.
We're slow.
That's all right. You get to the basics, what's really important.
Yeah, you have to
And
proceed
understanding
slowly through that.
Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to end on a note of self-promotion. And it's not exactly self-promotion because it's promotion of you, I hope. I have an app called Read With Me. And you can find it on the App Store or for Apple, or there's also an Android version of it too. I'm about to make it free. It was an app that I was charging for a monthly subscription. I'm going to make the monthly subscription voluntary because I want as many people to use this and have access to it as possible. And basically, I'm working my way through classics of literature, teaching them one chapter at a time. The app has my readings of the chapter, so you can just listen, on the go to me reading the chapter to you. And then I have about a 15-minute commentary on the chapter following each chapter. I have done Victor Hugo's 93, my favorite book. I think every human being should have that in their repertoire of experience. So that one is available. I just did Sinclair Lewis's Aerosmith. I did The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I did a Tolstoy short story. I'm about to do Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, which I'm a little intimidated by, but that's why I'm doing it. That's a perfect example. That's my daughter's favorite book. Her mother's intimidated by it, but she loves it. So I'm trying to be as good at reading literature as she is. So anyway, it will be free soon, I think probably at the start of November. But if any of you want the experience of of getting a taste for yourself of a VanDamme Academy literature curriculum, that is available.
I do it. It's
to you.
wonderful. Support.
Great.
Yes.
Just like a small little note.
Yes.
It would be nice if you put all the books that the kids are reading in your classes,
Uh-huh.
7th and 8th grade, in this format, so it'd be like parents can read with you.
Oh, I
And then
know.
discuss it with them.
Good.
I like all this
Well, so now, two things. One, I have the luxury of doing that with 93 now.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
because I created it for the app, when we do it in 8th grade, I send them the link to the recordings and they can listen while they read. And I find myself going, gosh, I wish I had that on recording to do my homework. So I could just go listen instead of. So that would be great. It'll take a lot of time.
Conversations in the car.
Yeah,
So they
that
can
would
kind
be
of
amazing.
see.
And that would help with the thing you were describing too.
Just like
Okay, that'll be on my,
In your free
On the
time.
to-do list.
yeah. But I think I would like to do that, yeah.
I do think though that the kids enjoy when I have read something,
Mhm.
so then they have to tell me.
Oh,
something,
yeah, sure,
right?
sure,
And
that's
then
great.
when they're trying to explain something to me, why this is important,
Mhm.
then they, it reinforces their learning.
Definitely, definitely.
So I kind of like that too.
Yeah, yeah. All right, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
coming.
Thank
And we
you.
will have more of these on other topics.
Where were your grandparents on the east